So next, we have the ground, we have the smoke, we have the tire. I'm gonna delete this distant light because we were using V-Ray, so we should use V-Ray lights. I'm also gonna grab the camera that I had from the previous scene, so I'll delete this one. And let me just import those elements. So here we have a V-Ray light rectangle. Again, pretty straightforward. The camera is looking from pretty much the same direction. The camera already has some V-Ray physical camera properties assigned to it. So you just select the camera and press this button, physical camera, and that way you have the physical properties. I have motion blur enabled, I have exposure being considered, and I have all these settings. The only thing that I changed from the default values is actually the shutter speed, which is at 1/5 of a second. 1/50th of a second. I think that's how you spell it. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm going to disable the motion blur for the initial tests. And here, yeah, everything else is fine. I'm also using a dome light. For the dome light, I'm using an HDRI from HDRI Haven. It's called Autoshop. And this is kind of my fill light. And then I have that main light to cast the shadows and everything. So the only thing that's missing now is pretty much for us to have a V-Ray renderer. So let's go into the out network and let's create our V-Ray renderer. And here on this one, I'm first gonna go to the objects and I want to disable these stars. I tend to prefer working with force objects and force lights. That way, even if it's not visible, I have more control and it's more robust. So here on the force objects, to begin, I'm just going to start with the ground and the tire, and then we'll work on the smoke just to check if these are working properly. On the force lights, I'm going to use both. So let's move on here to the renderer. On the renderer, I'm going to switch the type to bucket. And on the settings here for the bucket sampler, I'm going to use 13.0.02. The idea for now is to have really fast feedback on the renders. I'm going to lower the size of the bucket. I don't have that many buckets. And global illumination, for now, let's keep it on, or actually let's turn it off because we won't have much light bouncing here. We can test it with light on first, and then we'll see if we can tell a difference. I'm also going to override the camera resolution. The camera is working at full HD. Here on the view, here you have it, full HD. So I'm going to override to just do the first tests. And I think we're ready to go. Yeah, let's see what this gives us. So just select the node, go to your V-Ray tab, so click on the Show V-Ray Frame Buffer. You can also display the V-Ray Frame Buffer from here. And that also works. I'm going to hide the history for a moment. Actually, let's configure the history. Let's turn it on. Let's set the path to be. So I just created this folder inside the project folder. Select the folder, save and close, and let's hit render. It's by default, it kind of brings up this log window. I think that's something that's typically an option for beta version. So I'm working with V-Ray 5 beta version, V-Ray 5. Let's have a look at how this is going. So as you can see, everything is working well. We do have an offset here that I'll need to adjust in a moment. But other than that, I think it's looking pretty well. So let's close the log. Let's go here to the V-Ray options, render options, UI, and disable the log. So I figured the issue, looking at the material, the tarmac material, there was an error here on the shift amount. It was actually not half. I usually use half of the amount, but in this case I was missing a 0. So that was the issue. So now it should be okay. Let's give it another try. Let's go to frame 48 and give it another try. Let's go up. Okay, so now we do have contact and it's fixed. So I'm going to stop the rendering, turn off the region, and let's move on to actually testing the smoke. Let's make sure we include the smoke on our rendering settings. Again, if you want to select everything that's renderable, you can just replace this by a star and everything is going to be considered. Let's see how this looks. So I had to stop the previous render and do some adjustments because it was going to take a while and I didn't want to wait so much. So what I did was first on the V-Ray node, I actually did an override to the camera resolution to a quarter of the whole resolution so that it would help so that it would go faster. The other thing I did was actually on the material, on the shader itself. What I did was come here to the rendering. I increased the stepping to 200% and the shadow step to 400%. This, especially this one, should reduce your render times a bit. You run the risk of losing some of the detail, but as long as it's not noticeable, then you should be okay. The other thing I did was here on the smoke, on the volume light cache, this is a value that comes by default at 0.9. According to Chaos Group, you should increase this, you can increase this all the way up to 0.999 as long as you don't get artifacts. And the more you increase this value, the faster your renders will go. But after a certain point, you do get artifacts. I didn't want to risk those artifacts appearing, so I just went with 0.95, but you should definitely give it a try with 0.99. What else? So looking at this, I think it looks really good. Everything is fine. I just think this is too opaque. If you look at the alpha channel here, you'll see that the smoke is too opaque for my taste. This definitely looks very cool, especially if you look at this rendered. So this, looking at this in motion, it's definitely going to look awesome. But I think it's still too opaque, so I'm going to lower the opacity to 0.02, and I think everything is going to be good to go. The other thing that's missing definitely is the sense of motion that we're not getting because we don't have any motion blur, but that's going to be just a matter of turning on the camera. Here on the camera, just go to motion blur, turn it on, and you will have proper motion blur calculated. The other thing that you should do is whenever you're going to be rendering something with motion blur, you should go to your geometry, especially the geometry that's actually moving, and add some object properties. And on the object properties for V-Ray, you actually have a number of samples that you want to apply for that geometry's motion blur. And I'm going to increase this to 4. The default should be around 2. I think that's the default value. You also have V-Ray motion. You also have motion blur here as an option in render camera, and you have motion blur here. But it makes more sense if you're using a physical camera with those properties for you to use the properties here and leave this as is. Again, yeah, this was the default value for motion blur. What else? Now, we're gonna stop here. We have our scene ready to go. On the next lesson, we're gonna be having a look at an issue that we're gonna find with the motion blur for the tire.